Hey, welcome everybody to OnPodcast, the On Microsoft podcast, where we talk about the latest of the week and the week ahead, about, at least regarding Microsoft news. I am your host, Kareem Anderson, and I'm here with the world's greatest co-host,
Arif Bacchus.
and we're going to kind of walk you through a bunch of stuff that's happened past week, and that some things that we're keeping out for this week.
So our first topic of the show is another topic that we've constantly been talking about this past month or month and a half, which is Xbox. But it finally happened this week, and Microsoft launched both the Series X and Series X, and we'll be recapping some of the news from the week. And then Kareem, I'll leave the second topic for Kareem because it's close to his heart.
Yeah, for all of us jaded anti-Apple people, we'll be diving into their M1 Silicon announcement, their essential macOS on ARM presentation they gave this week. Kind of run through some of the hardware that they discussed, and kind of see where it stands in position to Windows on ARM. I personally don't think they're on the same trajectory, but who knows? We'll be talking about that though.
And let's not forget their big operating system launch. They launched Big Sur on, I think it was Thursday, November 12th. So we'll touch on that a bit.
I mean, they launched it on Thursday. People really got it Friday and
Oh,
Saturday.
yeah. Let's save
We'll
it
talk
for
about
the
that.
segment.
Yeah.
And then for you people who are here for Windows 10, that is our third topic. There was a lot of Windows 10 news this week, and we'll just recap some of the big Windows 10 stories for you all.
Yeah, and then we'll be talking about some stuff in the week ahead, just kind of looking at our rundown. I mean, there's not going to be a lot we don't foresee. Again, Microsoft could always surprise us, but we're going into holiday season where a lot of Microsoft employees will probably be taking some dueling time with for family and things like that, or just break from quarantine work. So we expect to be a little slower paced news cycle for the next few weeks.
But it's been busy this week, which brings us to our first topic, which is Microsoft's Xbox Series X and Series X. Series X and Series S.
You're
Every
never
week,
gonna get
every
that.
week, every week, same mistake. Series X and Series S launch on November 10th. So, as we talked about last week, we already reviewed Series X series last week. Our writer Laurent in France, he unboxed the Series S for us, and he found that he was impressed with it. And of course, we'll have the link in the description. But he pretty much liked the console, and he was impressed by how Microsoft managed to cram so much power inside the Xbox Series S, which isn't significantly bigger than the Xbox One S. And of course, he said, and he talked about the dimensions and how it's Microsoft's smallest Xbox console ever. And he also talked about pretty much the unboxing experience, like what's included in the box and what you get in the box and how it's good value for the money.
Yeah, there was a lot to be said about the Xbox and its rollout, essentially. We also have some kind of recap news on how others have been faring with the device now that they've had it for a couple of days. We've been seeing and hearing reports on YouTube in previous articles about some failure points for these fresh off the press devices, and this goes for both the PS5 and the Xbox. So far, seems to be majority of the issues are with the X, but the S seems to be holding its own. But it ranges. The issues range from disk drives not working to the console itself just shutting down. Could be potentially from overheating from some games, which I believe it's. I don't know if it's the Assassin's Creed or if it's Call of Duty. One of the two have issued a statement about sending out a patch that they know that the game itself causes the consoles to overheat and again shut down. So again, there are some, reports, and it hasn't been necessarily widespread, but it's early going. So each story has its own life of its own about the console, and so just for early adopters, people who are just getting the console in these first couple weeks, be aware of that. Make sure you have your warranties handy and phone calls ready if you do happen to get a device that's defective or experiencing issues.
But it's not all bad news for Microsoft. Microsoft tweeted out that the console launch was the biggest launch in Xbox history. In a tweet, they said, "Thank you for supporting the largest launch in Xbox history. In 24 hours, more new consoles sold in more countries than ever before, and we're working with retail to resupply as quickly as possible." That was a tweet from Phil Spencer. Of course, they didn't directly share how many consoles they sold. I don't think they ever did. They just
I don't think they ever
speak of
will
it.
again, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
They seem pretty adamant about doing user experience. And again, they're in second place. Coming even into this generation, they're probably still sort of behind, but don't expect to see numbers anytime soon.
And if you've been on Twitter or pretty much any Facebook or any social media, you probably saw the videos going around of the Xbox supposedly being on fire and blowing out smoke. But we do have a message for you guys, which you probably know already. That is fake news because
Yeah.
people. I'll
to,
let
to,
Kareem speak for it.
to coin a phrase, it is fake news. Like we said, there are legitimate issues going on with the Xbox Series X, but some person took it upon themselves, maybe a handful of people who figured out that if you blow vape smoke into your the overhead area, the ventilation section of the Xbox Series X, you can make it look like it's smoking, and then record it and kind of go viral. It was an unfortunate story that caught fire. The Xbox team has since sent out or issued a warning not to blow vape smoke into their consoles to go viral.
And of course, there also was another thing going around of I think it was a ping pong ball. Like someone
Yeah,
put the ping pong ball in the middle of the console, and they're like, "Oh, it levitates. It's blowing that much air to make this ping pong ball levitate." But that is also fake news.
yeah. It was done with some strings, and they couldn't even afford the CGI to make it look like it was stringless. So again, as you read some of these stories coming out about defects and issues with both consoles, make sure to follow up with each one of them. Make sure it doesn't happen to you, and take them for what they are. There's a lot of money to be made for some people to come up with stories like that.
And there's also another big Xbox story. I think it's still trending on our site right now,
Yeah, this
which
one
is
isn't a good one.
these brand new consoles. They don't support game streaming on Windows
What?
10. What's
Yeah,
up with
well,
that?
this is dumb, and this seems to be hopefully a failing of just early launch bugs and things of that nature. It seems that the ability to stream games from your console to the Windows PC using the Xbox Console Companion app is not supported for the Xbox Series X or S out of the box, at least as of right now. Microsoft hasn't issued any statements regarding a potential update that could enable this, but this seems like a pretty big gaffe. To our knowledge, it's something that Microsoft previously discussed, but again, there is no official support page for it yet, and Microsoft hasn't, Nelson hasn't tweeted about it. Nobody's really said anything about this. So yeah, this just seems like a big miss that hopefully will be patched soon.
There's always hope for Microsoft to introduce these things because Xbox OS is always getting updated. I mean, Xbox insiders are always testing new features, as are Windows insiders in Windows 10. So could be in the works, could be coming, but for now, Microsoft is very quiet about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, Microsoft is a software company, so I have some faith that this. I mean, this is part and parcel of their strategy to commingle Windows 10 and Xbox experiences. So again, to not be able to stream seems a bit odd, especially as xCloud becomes a thing. So again, I expect this to hopefully be done by Q2, going into February or March of next year at the latest.
So now, why don't you introduce to us about these new Apple ARM
All
Silicon
right.
M1 MacBooks, which
Yeah.
start at $700, by the way, if you include the Mac Mini.
Yeah. I was excited for this news, not as an Apple fanboy, not as Windows fanboy looking to kind of bash Apple. I was excited to finally see if they were going to elaborate more on what they introduced at WWDC this year. They made a big splash about their new silicon. I know people have been referring to it as Mac on ARM, but it's really the M1 chip and Apple Silicon. That's the story, not necessarily ARM licensed architecture, because they're doing a whole bunch of custom stuff that almost renders the license null and void. There's some things that they've taken from it, but they're not using the full breadth of it the same way that smartphones or Windows PCs are doing. So I would jump into this again just based on my cursory knowledge of the Mac OS, of Windows in general, how ARM is kind of licensed, things like that. But um, you, from what they said, Apple's new devices will be launched, and this is including their line, which they covered a large amount of devices. I didn't expect as many, but the MacBook Air, the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and a Mac Mini will now be powered by this new M1 chip, which is an SoC for Macs. And the magic of this thing is that everything is on that tiny, what is it,
5 nanometer chip. Yep, it's
and
the
so yeah.
they're
Okay.
using 5 nanometers, whereas the Qualcomm chips, I think the SQ2 and the new Surface Pro X top end model, which we talked about a couple of months back, it's only 7 nanometers, so they do have the advantage there.
Yeah, and again, the magic of putting these all, these chips the way they're designed is that they speak to each other because they're all on the same motherboard, and they are not having to, this adds to the speed and efficiency of the reads and writes of things happening on the OS side. So, with that being said, Apple came with their usual grandiose presentation of X amount faster and X amount cooler and X amount, but I mean, and they kept referencing the top end Windows PCs, but they never actually said which
Which
one,
one? Yeah.
which is kind of a bit disconcerting because, if this were as impressive as it could be, and I'm assuming they've done years of testing, you could have pulled out a Dell, you could have pulled out an XPS, a specific configuration, even if it's just an i5 to kind of, blow people's minds, but they just kept using these vague terminologies and fake charts. But the numbers on the big charts did say that they deliver up to 3.5 times faster CPU, 6 times faster GPU performance, and about 15 times faster machine learning capabilities and support, and a battery life that would be 2 times longer than what they currently have for Macs. Again, they didn't measure battery life against PCs, but it's kind of a wash because most PCs tend to top out maybe an hour or so short of Macs just in general, and that has to do with Windows and specific OEMs and how the software and hardware work with each other. Mac has that advantage. But I mean, again, these vague numbers we'll have to kind of test. But there were a couple things, some other things that they were talking about as far as the chip. It comes with an 8-core CPU, 8-core GPU. It has, what is it, unfiled memory architecture accessible to the entire SoC. And that again, this is Apple's claim that that is faster than chips in 98% of PC laptops. They said that about, I don't know, 15 times during this 45-minute long presentation. It
and
was
again,
impressive.
they and again they didn't say which specific laptop they were talking about. I mean, it could have been a HP with a Celeron processor for all we know.
Well, and again, 98% of PCs out there aren't the ones that I'm assuming our readers and our listeners are using. We use I would assume the upper echelon of PCs, things that are costing, upwards of $1,000 and more. We're looking at $1,500 purchases. So these 98% numbers are usually for stuff that you find at like your Best Buy that are your 700 and lower. And these things are coming with i3s, i5s, but with, 4 and 8 gigabytes of memory. So again, we'll have to see in day-to-day usage how these vague numbers work out in Apple's favor. The other thing that were privy to was that the new MacBook Airs are 3 times faster. This is according to Apple than the best-selling Windows laptops, and that has nothing to do with percentages. They're just saying the best-selling. And again, that could be, I think, numbers-wise, that could be the Pavilion line. of HP, not even the um, uh, the Spectre lines. Those aren't the best selling. Those are the nicest ones that HP has. But I believe they still have a Pavilion line that sells, in volume, in mass. So again, that's what some of these references could be. Um, what else do we have about the new chip? Do you want to jump in?
Also, they did give these wild battery life claims. They were like, the M1 MacBook Pro has up to 17 hours of wireless web browsing and 20 hours of video playback. And then they also had the M1 powered Mac Mini, which is $700. So if you do want an M1 Mac, which I'm pretty sure our diehard Windows fans probably don't want, this is the cheapest way to get one. You can buy a M1 Mac Mini, and they're like, oh, when compared to the best-selling Windows desktop in this price range, the Mac Mini is just 1/10 the size and delivers 5 times faster performance. I mean, again, this is M1 in the Mac Mini compared to a regular Windows desktop. We don't know what they're comparing it to, but supposedly it's faster. And we did see some supposed Geekbench 5 benchmarks out there, and I think it was Tom's guide that picked up the piece. I mean, I never liked talking Geekbench in my reviews or even in general because the testing is just synthetic. It's not really representative of how you use a laptop or what the chip is really capable of. But apparently, the M1 MacBook Air got a Geekbench 5 score of 7,433. And that beats out the XPS 13's Core i7 with 5,300 and which scored 5,319. So maybe Apple is telling the truth here, but again, I mean, it's just synthetic benchmarks, and we don't know where they're coming from until you actually have one in your hand to open 5 million Safari tabs and push that thing to the limit.
Yeah, aside from, going over the, decimals and the single digit numbers and scores of that, synthetic benchmarks, there was a piece written by Daniel Rubino over at Windows Central, which I'm going to reference in some of they're not necessarily criticism, but at least highlighting some of the things that were missing from the presentation that anybody who's curious about this from a Windows perspective might want to consider. And I think there were 5 really good points. One, he mentions that, again, with this presentation, it's new chips, but the same hardware. And this is kind of indicative of Tim Cook's ability to squeeze the very last cent out of product manufacturing processes. So again, I didn't expect Apple to come out with new designs, not yet. I'm pretty sure by the end of their 2-year transition that they've been talking about, we'll start to finally see perhaps thinner MacBook Airs, if that's even possible. Smaller things like that. But for now, I think what they're going to continue to do is leverage the space in a current MacBook size, even though they don't need it, to either pack in more battery or get the cooling down that they need for these fanless designs that they're coming up with. So that was one thing to keep in mind. So if you're going to go buy, as an Apple person, if you're going to go buy a new MacBook with this M1 chip, it's going to be a bit confusing, actually. You won't visually be able to go in and say, I want that new device. It'll be like, does that one have
the chip I want?
Yeah, it's going to sort of be like how we have this issue with AMD and Intel.
Intel, right.
You go into a Best Buy or you go online now because people are going to stores as much, and you have to find out which configuration it is. And even then, you have to figure out which of the tiers of the configuration you're going to have. Apple doesn't have, an M1.2 or anything just yet, but again, looking visually, you won't be able to tell that this new MacBook Air has an M1 chip unless you ask someone or it's clearly labeled in the website. Another one he has, and I think this kind of goes to what we've been talking about for the last 5 or 10 minutes, was we don't know how much faster it is because, again, their reports and charts from this presentation were super vague. They didn't have anything. They had a graph, but none of the axes were marked with any valuable information or notable metrics. We also don't know what how efficiently the threading is done on these chips, and what happens when you whip up something in the new Rosetta 2 emulator and try and do something else native, and how those kind of correspond in your day-to-day usage. Number three, Daniel points out, and I think this is a real big one, is that there was no mention of 4G, LTE, or 5G, and they just released a phone with all 5G information. And this is part of the ARM license that I was saying that they didn't really take advantage of. Um, it'd be interesting to see why they held back on that. I mean, maybe it's battery performance reasons, but for the last about 3 years or so, Microsoft and its partners have been pushing forward with LTE, and I don't believe there's been too great of battery hits for those. I mean, the Pro X has LTE. There are variations of the Surface Pro 7, Surface Pro 6 as well, and I think even the 5 that have LTE. And with LTE enabled, I think the battery difference is a negligible 30 minutes or so. So, Apple seems to be holding off on this LTE maybe as a feature set
I
or maybe part of the new design.
I personally, I think it's probably something to do with form factor, maybe because I know all these Snapdragon powered Windows laptops, they all are pretty much slim and light. I think Daniel did point it out. That's number four on his list, which I think you'll get into next, which is that a lot of these LTE and Qualcomm and ARM Windows laptops are all slim, they're all light, they're all ultra portable, they're all, you can drop it in your bag and go and enjoy your Wi-Fi and your not your Wi-Fi, sorry, your LTE anywhere you go, which is not which is something maybe Apple probably. I mean, I can't speak for them because I'm not working for them, but I'm just thinking maybe probably something to do with changing the design of these MacBooks. Maybe it's something that's the reason why they couldn't pack a LTE antenna in there. Maybe.
This also goes to again our point number four, and something else I read. I believe Ed Bott wrote this a little a ways back about the market segments for Apple and for Microsoft and its partners concerning Windows ARM. For Microsoft, it's to basically transition their apps and software to an ARM architecture, and that's to secure their Linux base essentially, to make sure that their services are where the customers are at, and the customers
Right.
are increasingly leaving behind x86 and things of that nature. And so they're, basically doing a public experiment with Windows on ARM to make sure their software is ready for it. As for Apple, this was a bit of head scratcher we were talking about is before we came on. How does this fit with their confidence in the iPad Pro? Because essentially this, chipset and what they're offering and bringing their iOS apps to the Mac through this transition seems to be basically kneecapping iPad Pro.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because what ends up happening is you buy the iPad Pro, you buy the keyboard, you buy the pen, and you're at the same prices as this new MacBook Air that basically has all the same apps and a little less of the functionality, not being having LTE or whatever. But for people who wanted the apps but needed the form factor, this is what's going to suffice. And now they're not going to buy that iPad Pro. And that vision of the flexibility of an iPad Pro and moving forward is kind of stunted. And I'm saying this all to say that maybe keeping LTE to the iPad Pro keeps that market like, oh, I need to be on
Yeah.
the go. I need to get the iPad Pro version of this versus my more stationary clamshell laptop.
That's a good point. Very,
So
very good point.
they're probably going to drag their feet on that until they can cannibalize, which is what Apple's good at, that market share themselves. But again, like I said, back to Bot's point, for anybody looking at the comparisons between why did it take Microsoft so long to get Windows on ARM halfway working like it is now, to Apple coming out of the gate with this, just again keep in mind that there are two different market segments. Apple's trying to sell hardware, and Microsoft is trying to optimize its apps, and they're just providing a platform for OEMs to kind of sell the hardware underneath it. They, to be honest with you, could probably care less about selling an actual Surface Pro X, but it is the flagship device to show you that businesses can rely on thin clients now and still get the breadth of Microsoft Office, get Azure, get all of these things, but in architecture that works for them.
But the fact that Apple is doing ARM, or at least custom M1 ARM silicon, doesn't that really show that, hey, Microsoft is doing something big, which is Daniel's fifth point?
And that's the strongest point he's making. And I think this is kind of something we've seen, and for us Windows fans have seen repeated throughout history between Microsoft and Apple, is that Microsoft leaps out forward with something, gets ridiculed about it, fumbles it, admittedly, and then and then maybe 5 to 10 years later, Apple comes out with the same exact thing polished, and people go, "Ah, that's what they were trying to do." And, this goes back to the Spot Watch, which is now the Apple Watch, which is amazing. Windows-based tablets, which you have the iPad Pro. I mean, this history of them doing it. So back when Microsoft did Windows 8 and they started doing this
Windows RT.
Windows RT, and make sure that the apps in Windows like Office ran perfect, ran well on that, but nothing else did. This is sort of what Apple's doing. Apple's claim that their native apps will excel in this, and anything else will be handled by the Rosetta that they have. Uh, Microsoft didn't have the Rosetta component when they did Windows 8, so it just was Office, and then you had a bunch of apps that didn't work. But the idea of the code base bringing the flexibility of the architecture all started with that. And again, it took, what is this now? They came out in 2012, something like that.
Yeah.
So we're now 8 years into this Windows fumbling with ARM, and to see that Apple come kicking down the door saying this is how it's done. Again, as Daniel says, this is Microsoft's vision, and they were right to think this way. They just have been publicly dropping the ball on it.
So let's stop talking about Apple now.
Well, we'll stop talking about Apple and its vague numbers and stuff like that, but we'll talk about something a little easier to kind of digest for people, which is
Windows 10.
No. Oh, we're gonna get to Windows 10, but it's Big Sur.
Oh yeah, Big Sur.
Yeah,
Sorry,
you
I jumped the gun. Yeah, we tried it. I downloaded it, and our writer in France, Laurent, also downloaded it. And Apple had some initial troubles rolling out Big Sur.
Big ones.
I do believe some people were hit with early. They announced that it was rolling out on November 12th, which was Thursday, and they put it out. You could download it from the App Store, and you could see it, and you click download, and it would say 3.5 days remaining for download. And then it would download, and then all of a sudden you would get a error. I tweeted about it. Obviously, you would get an error code telling you that an error occurred while installing the selected updates. But they were having some server problems, not only with Mac but also on the iOS side, and they had it fixed by late afternoon on Thursday, and people were well and away downloading Big Sur, which is something that I myself did, and I want to save it for discussion in the week ahead segment. But I'm pretty much using it as my main OS for the last 2 or 3 days. Well, today's Saturday, so 2 days, and I'm gonna compare it a bit to Windows, but I digress. Let's save that for the week ahead segment.
My laughter comes as a bit of Schadenfreude. Like, this is the misery loves company thing, right? As a Windows user, we get these issues, and especially as an insider, these update issues, and it's humbling to see Apple users kind of fumble through this a little bit too. And again, it all goes back to software science and how precise and how difficult it is, and how I think we take for granted both everybody who works and engineers software to be able to push out over the air an update that goes out to many devices and thousands of configurations, and after the update runs like it relatively did beforehand. It's almost magic the way these guys do that. And I think, again, with Apple kind of going through these teething pains as far as the Big Sur update, it just goes to show you that it's, even when they say it just works, sometimes it just doesn't.
And Microsoft also had a support article explaining that how Office and the Microsoft 365 apps would work fine on the M1 Silicon Macs. I just wanted to bring that up, even though it's not really directly related to Big Sur.
Well, it kind of is. because I think with Big Sur, it enables this operating system all of the features uh, that were mentioned in the M1 announcement. So once you have this, or any, I guess any Mac that has the M1 will now have this this will be the benchmark operating system to enable all of that. And that basically what ends up happening with M1 chips, I believe they've already said that stuff like Parallels isn't going to work because of the way the virtualization is working for the M1. And so this is, if you're moving up to Big Sur and you're thinking about potentially, you like the way it works and you want to try it on the new chipset, be aware that if you need to run Windows, you will have issues, at least
Yeah.
for right now. And the same thing for
Segue.
Office.
Perfect segue
Segue.
into our Windows 10 news recap, which time to get out the old Windows Insider hat again and put it on for the segment here.
Yeah, he's getting all. For those of you who are listening, he's getting in the mood. We had like insider mood music. We put that on.
So first off, Windows 10 version 1903, also known as the May 2020 update, it's going to reach end of support next month on December 8th. So Microsoft put out notice that if you're still running Windows 10 version 1903, it's time to upgrade now and install the November 2019 update so you can continue receiving your security and monthly updates and not put your PC at risk for viruses and other issues.
Yeah, and then following that, we have the Microsoft Edge Insider installers for Windows 10X Emulator and HoloLens 2 are now available. Microsoft has quietly made its Edge Insider channels available on two additional platforms, which is HoloLens 2 and Windows 10X Emulator. Again, we still haven't seen any actual Windows 10X stuff, but for those of us who download the emulator back in the day, you can get a new taste for the Edge browser. Installers for the Edge Beta. Installers are for Edge Beta, Dev, and Canary channels. They're available now if you go to the Microsoft Edge Insider page to get the update. You can manually do that.
This is proof that Windows 10X is not a pipe dream. It's still alive.
I think the software bits are out in the world. I don't know if anybody's actively going in and saying, "Hey, we're going to update this." I will believe it when I see it.
And speaking of Windows 10, we did have another dev channel update this week. And once again, it's still a small update, nothing big coming along with it. It just tweaks some minor changes for Win32 app tiles in the start menu and the usual bug fixes. So nothing big coming out of the dev channel just yet.
Yeah, and again, we don't. I don't think we expect to see anything just yet. I think it was wishful thinking on Zach Bowden from Windows Central's part about sometime in mid 2021. Seeing some new stuff. Last up, we have the announcement of Windows Holographic version 20H2. It's now available through the Windows Update. This release brings new features to the HoloLens 2, and the original HoloLens headsets for those of people who still have those. I think we did a post a couple of weeks ago about actual dev kits going out to anybody who's interested, and they have a finance program for it. Previous to this, dev kits were only going out to specific industries. You had to be a company of a certain size. You had to be a company in a certain industry as far as medical or research or university properties. But now if you have, I think it's $3,000 to tote, or if you want to pay, I think it ended up being like $40 a month or something like that, you can grab yourself one of these HoloLens 2 dev kits.
And there, like Kareem said, there are a couple of other features too. In addition to the eye tracking and auto eye positioning update, there's also a certificate manager in the settings now for HoloLens 2 and some improved kiosk mode functionality. And to go in specifically into the auto eye position support thing, HoloLens 2 will now actively compute eye positions without you going through the eye tracking calibration, which is good because obviously it's a holographic headset, so everything you do pretty much depends on your eye and your eye movements.
Yeah. The training modules that were put into this early on, they were useful. I think having it auto calibrated is even better for people to just kind of jump in and get used to their augmented reality environments. It's just good. And I think this again leads to the consumerization that we're seeing as far as the development for HoloLens is going. Again, for people who had more time that were tweaking it specifically for research purposes and things like that, they needed the granular mechanisms for eye tracking. For people who are just again developing stuff for, as we said, kiosk. If you're just doing this as a demo for maybe the latest game or how to use it in movie production, stuff like that, this auto tracking leads to that, or at
And
least
there
acknowledges
there
that.
was a whole bunch of other stuff too, which if we go into it might drag us on for another hour. So we'll have the links and the screenshots showing some of the other features coming to Windows Holographic version 20H2.
Yeah, it's still a thing, even despite it not being part of what I would assume would be an easy tangential release with the Xbox Series X. Microsoft is still pushing forward with augmented reality. It's found its niche in enterprise and education and things like that. But hopefully, with now that Magic Leap has kind of fallen in on itself, we'll get some entertainment stuff from the likes of Google and Microsoft on this front, and whatever magical device Apple has stored somewhere.
Have you ever tried a HoloLens?
I did. I tried one. I'm here in Florida, and we had a Microsoft store that I would go to. I'd probably go once a week just to play with stuff, and it is amazing. Like
It's wild.
I want to be able to get one of those, for $700 if I could. I think it's amazing, and the longer this development goes on, the smaller these components get. I think the more likely I am to use it on a normal basis. There was just so many cool things to do with it.
Exactly. We won't even need to be on our laptops. You just put the HoloLens on and then you could stare anywhere you want.
Yes,
The whole
this is.
world will be your office.
I don't know if I tweeted this, but if not, I'm gonna have to do this tomorrow, and I'm gonna have to tell them like, of all of the bad things that have happened in this pandemic, there was marketing for the HoloLens for people who needed to work at home and didn't have the space for it. Like that is your bread and butter right there. It's like, hey, do you need a home office? Don't got room for a desk? Put your headset on, get your work done.
The whole world will be your office.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing. But they missed the boat on that as did most people. We were all too concerned with actual problems. So I don't begrudge them that.
I tried the HoloLens too when Microsoft had a press event in New York City a couple I think a year and a half ago when
Yeah.
they initially wanted a press to try it out, and it's a pretty mind-blowing experience to put it on and then like move your eyes and then you're not even doing anything and it knows where you want to look and it knows what you're looking at.
Well,
It's just like so amazing the stuff that Microsoft could do with this headset.
I forget who they partnered with, but remember that Universal's pin thing, that technology that would basically like leave augmented reality um, images and projections in space cemented. So
I
that
don't.
was, yeah, I forget who Microsoft partnered with somebody, and they were using Universal pins. So basically, you could put on your headset, and no matter where you looked at, these pins would stay in place. So, with the augmented reality thing on, you could see it. And, obviously, when you turn your head, it would disappear, and you turn your head back, and it would reappear. That's like the big magic of augmented reality is that these things that are digital projections feel like they're cemented in reality somewhat, especially when they have weight to them and have resonance and agency. So, again, as long as they continue to perfect that, I look forward to AR. Not so much VR, but AR.
Speaking of looking forward, there's a lot to look forward in the.
Segway.
There's a lot to look forward the week ahead at on Microsoft. We do have our writer Laurent. He's planning to review Xbox Series S, so keep an eye out for that. Hopefully, we have him on the show next week too to talk about his experience with both consoles. And yeah,
Yeah, hopefully I can finish being lazy and finally get up this Surface Laptop Go review. I started trying to do the comparison. I feel like I really need to kind of break up what I was going to do with this originally. I would do a full, legit review of it, and then I will do the comparison because trying to combine the two is becoming too long and it, started meandering. So look forward to seeing my review of the Laptop Go and how it's worked out for me during this pandemic. It's pretty well. And then what else do we have?
My Big Sur review.
Yes, it's Big Sur. Oh, and I think you'd also tease something about your birthday gift and how that
Oh
works
yeah.
as a Microsoft user.
Again, so going back to, we do talk about Microsoft here, but Apple exists and there are people who use both Apple devices with Microsoft stuff. So
Yeah, it's surprising them.
going back to that, this week, look for my review of Mac OS Big Sur. Not really so much of a review as it is a comparison between the two world's most popular operating systems. So if you don't have a Mac or have a MacBook or ever tried Mac OS, you can read my piece and see the differences between the two, not just in terms of design, but also in terms of usability and apps and core experiences and that kind of thing. And as Kareem hinted, I did get the iPhone 12 Pro Max here, so gonna do a review of that as well and talk about what is it like using it and comparing it a bit to the Surface Duo. I mean, not you can't compare apples to oranges, pun intended, but comparing the two and what does the same money get you and how's it can you use such a Apple product as a Microsoft phone? You get the drift.
Yeah, I mean, with all the new things that were enabled in iOS 14, I think it was, or 14.2, as far as being able to change default things like that, you're getting closer and closer to making this the Windows phone that Satya Nadella kind of teased back in the day. His iPhone was his, pro Windows phone or whatever. So it's cool. It's cool that all the things are coming together for all of us in tech who could be super excited about just having new stuff.
We just hope that your phone eventually gets working with iPhones because right now it's only working with Androids. I dream of the day where an iPhone could work properly with your phone in Windows 10.
Yeah, that would be ideal, but we'll see. And see, maybe with this ARM architecture, we'll start to see more app crossover stuff that hadn't been enabled before.
So I think that pretty much does it to end our podcast this week, unless you have any other things to add.
No, no, that's I think that's enough for everyone to kind of digest and kind of sit on and look forward to for next week.
Any final thoughts, comments to add in?
Yeah, I want everyone to stay safe, wear a mask, and again, it's hard. It seems to be getting harder and harder for us to enjoy just the smaller things as this overarching kind of environment we're all living in. So if you can, please enjoy all small things. If you bought a new console, enjoy that. Don't compare it to the other console. If you bought an iPhone, don't compare it to something else. Just enjoy what you have.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in this week.
Yeah, thank you for listening to us ramble. We enjoy it every week, and we're happy to see the comments.
You could find us on Twitter. I am at abacjern, and you are.
I'm at Mindhead1. Again, Mindhead Original. Give me the handle. I need it.
And be sure to follow us on Twitter at on Microsoft and email us your questions and your comments to podcast at onmicrosoft.com.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and see you again next week. Same place, same time.